right. Thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you.
I want to start with a first question that I think a lot of creators are going to be interested in, and that's addressed to Rudy. Can you start by telling us what are the global trends that you've been seeing in the podcast industry globally, and also in the MENA region, what kind of opportunities and challenges do you see coming up?
Okay, well, hi, and thank you so much for having me. If we're going to talk trends, I'm going to start with focus on the one biggest trend that we're seeing globally, and probably the most important one that Spotify is focused on at the moment, and that is video podcasting. When it comes to video, we know that this is one of the most powerful forms of human expression today. And from Spotify's point of view, we really believe that this is going to be absolutely essential to the way that users engage with content on our platform going forward. And we've been consistently investing and innovating in this space. And the objective really has been to make sure that creators have the tools that they need to be able to publish high quality video content on Spotify. And I think you really just need to kind of go to the numbers to understand what kind of impact this is having. If you look globally, we already have 250,000 or 250,000 video podcasts uploaded on Spotify. If you look at the growth in creators uploading videos to Spotify, this has been growing at about 70% year on year, which is just absolutely phenomenal growth. And then if we kind of go deeper into the trends within video podcasting specifically, we're seeing some really important trends when it comes to just how audiences are engaging with video podcasting and how it's shaping audience engagement in general on the platform. And one of the ways I like to think about it is that when Spotify first launched, we were empowering and enabling creators to be heard by everyone. And now we are all about enabling creators to also be seen by everyone, which is a really, really powerful and a really, really exciting shift for us. We kind of think about the big themes, so the big kind of trends for video podcasting under the three big themes. The first one is how are we enabling creators to engage with their audiences in completely new ways? And that's exactly what video podcasting is. And I think the most important part of that is that it's just enabling a much deeper level of connection and authenticity when it comes to kind of audience engagement. And within that, it's also opening up completely new usage moments as well. We have a feature which is background and foreground listening. And so what that does, it's just adding a completely new consumption moment and a new level of stickiness to content. So what we're seeing is that people are turning on a podcast on their way home, on the drive from work and listening to on audio in their car. And then they're coming home and flipping over and then watching the rest of that podcast at home. So that's a really important trend. The other trend we're seeing is more on discovery. Something Spotify's always had, kind of unmatched capabilities when it comes to discovery and audience insights. But what we're seeing now is that video podcasts are being discovered by a completely new audience, which is video first. And that is when you think about Gen Z. So what's happening now is that we're seeing the growth in the Gen Z cohort engaging with video on our platform is I think it's 130% year on year, which is incredible. So what's happening now is they're coming to our platform to look for video content. So that's a huge opportunity for video podcasting. And then kind of the last theme, or the potential theme that we're seeing, is also on monetization. There's two parts to this. One is just on the audience growth and the audience engagement that video podcasting allows, because that is the most important part when it comes to looking for brand support or advertising support. I think the other part of that I find really interesting actually is that it's kind of taking podcasting, it's kind of propelling it into a new kind of industry space. What I mean by that is that if you think about the podcast advertising industry globally, it's valued at about $3 billion. But if you go to the digital video ad industry, it's valued at about $160 billion. So immediately, this is pushing that whole industry into a new opportunity as well. So those are kind of the three big themes we think about. I think what's clear from the growth we're seeing on our platform is that video isn't a supplementary format that we're just going to add on. What's happening is that it's becoming absolutely essential to the way that users experience podcasts and basically audio as well on our platform. If I take more of a MENA point of view, I think, well, first thing is that MENA has such strong capabilities when it comes to like rich storytelling and really original creative production. So I think that this region can play a really important role in how the future of video podcasting shapes up. If we look specifically at trends, right now what we see across MENA is that the UAE is the biggest consumer of video podcasts. So go UAE, closely followed by Saudi Arabia. So there's appetite there. In terms of what we see at the moment, though, is that most of the viewership is consolidated around key global titles. So you think about things like the Joe Rogan Experience or Dario Basilio, that's what we see. But this is quite common across emerging markets. But what it is a huge opportunity because it shows that there's a huge appetite for video consumption. It also, we have in this region a demographic dividend in terms of young audiences. So the potential there is huge. I would say the biggest opportunity for MENA, we've done such a great job in terms of categories and building out really strong breadth of podcast categories. I think going forward, the opportunity is in diversity of these, deepening kind of within each of these categories, and obviously getting as many people as possible to start moving to video podcasting for all of the opportunities that we've mentioned.
Okay, that's quite interesting. A lot of focus on video podcasting, and I feel like all of today we've talked a lot about that, and it's a complete shift. What I want to know now from your perspective, Hiba, as head of visual communication at the School of Audio Engineering, how do you see this video podcasting shift impacting, you know, the traditional podcasts in the region? And also, I think something that everyone here wants to hear is, what advice would you give the content creators today who want to transition into video podcasting?
I think the very interesting part about video podcasting, just to build on what Ruthie has said, is that we have to look at it from two perspectives. So from the point of view of the creators and definitely from the point of view of the viewers. And we're seeing that a very high number of millennials and Gen Zs are consuming these podcasts. And we know that what talks to them is video, right? So the more we have video, the more we're going to engage with them, regardless what they're driving, and then they pause and then they continue and watch. So listening half, watching half. But the best engagement is in video, and you know the statistics is showing it, which is amazing. The other part is also, we were talking earlier about the fact that when it's video, it's having an easier searchability. Right? Because then you can put it on multiple platforms, and then you can utilize the search engines of multiple social media platforms out there to support what already exists on Spotify, for example, or other podcasting platforms. So from this perspective, we're going to see a lot of move toward video because it's a win-win on both situations, right? You know, the jump into that is a little bit tough, yes, because, as earlier panels have said, that you can start with the first year with only audio and then test the waters, get comfortable around, you know, the mic, the interview, the structure of your podcast, and then you can start thinking about moving towards a video platform approach. There's also other way to bounce into this, which you get support from, you know, companies that will help you start up your podcast. And the really cool thing about this is that you can leverage the connections that they have, because we have to face the truth that, you know, podcast is rising, yes, and it's amazing, but it's still very emerging compared to social media and its presence. So for you to create a penetration, let's call it, in that market, you need to have a lot of exposure, and you need the help that you get, you know, the best help that you can get with people that are experienced. And, you know, the best way, we were talking earlier, it's because of word of mouth. So you need to be on other people's podcasts and stuff like that. So if you go with companies that already have published multiple podcasts, they can get you that connections, and it will help you to kickstart, definitely. But, and it's also done slowly, if you pace yourself slowly. But, so two ways to do it. Yeah.
Well, I think a lot of people here today want to transition. I know I am because I'm only on audio. But I think content creation can be tricky, especially in
100%.
time. You know, a lot of time and resources, and I think we talked about that. So I want to jump into the companies that are producing a lot of podcasts, and you have a big network, both of you. But for you, Ramzi, specifically, can you please tell us what kind of challenges are you facing today in terms of content creation in the MENA region? Especially, and I know because my podcast started in Morocco and now I'm reaching a lot of people in the Middle East, what I want to know is how do you ensure that podcasts are relevant in all these countries and with different stories and voices, especially a lot of people mentioned this morning the language or just different Arabic dialects, etc. How do you ensure that the podcasts are relevant and represented?
Yeah, thank you for that. It's a great question. I think there's a couple of things. I would definitely lean into data. I think that's really important. And the more data we as content creators and companies that are producing a lot of content, the more data we have, the better informed decisions we can make. And so I think looking at that, so if you look just really quickly, if you follow the money, I think video is where a lot of the money is, and that's why people are pivoting or moving towards video. If you look at the language as well, I mean, we just had an Egyptian comedy podcast. I think comedy works really well in certain dialects and in certain places, and it doesn't in other places. And so those are important things. But I think, looking at the consumption rates and the different amounts of data, and the different places you can get that data. I think also just to push back a little bit, I think audio has places that are really powerful and really important. And I think, for certain conversations around sensitive issues, audio is quite important and has an ability to express. I would also argue, we just launched a kids podcast and audio stories channel called Shamandar. And that's really important because I don't think kids should only be consuming video. They shouldn't only be scrolling on TikTok and Spotify and other apps now. So I think that's a component. Definitely, over the last year or so, Salt has transitioned more into video, and we're going to be doing more of that. I mean, we have to follow the money where the money goes, and that's where a lot of it is. But we also think audio will maintain an important place in that space. I think the other thing that I would say too is that the different varieties of content. A lot of things are shifting to video conversational, and I think there's been a couple of big shows that have done that for us and pushed that, and I think that's really important, and I think there will be more of that. But there are also other types of content that we need to produce and we need to be able to share, and not everybody can consume that in the same way. So I think making sure that there's a variety of content, a variety of formats, and also a diverse set of voices. Salt really started, quite a while ago now, almost 8 years, and we said that it was very important that voices are heard. Now we also think, maybe building on that, it's not just voices being heard, but it's also, voices being amplified, voices having conversations with each other, which often doesn't happen. So
that's quite interesting. You talk about audience, and congratulations for the launch of Shamanda, right? The kids podcast. And that really shows that there are other audiences out there like kids, right? And I want to deep dive into the audience preferences, right? And I want to ask you, Chirag, how did you see also, as a CEO of MENA podcast network, I want to understand how, from your experience, what kind of evolution have you seen in audience preferences in the past, few years in the MENA region, and where do you see that shift coming up? Because, now people want to video content instead of just audio, for example, but how did you see that evolve, and what kind of, trends are you seeing in the listener preferences?
Right, so not a loaded question at all. Yeah, I've always felt like Ramzi, right? Like I feel like I should put a leg up for audio again and say that, it's not like we're throwing away audio. I think how we've changed it for us, and having a long conversations today, is making it maybe audio first. So making sure that you're your content can still be heard when the video is not available, because I see that pitfall sometimes, right? You start talking, you just assume that everybody's listening to video. That's not typically the case. There's absolutely been a shift to video, especially when we talk about newer generations. There's a very intrinsic sort of feeling towards video that perhaps maybe even I don't have, right? So I love being able to do my dishes and listen to something, right? And that's great, but I know that there are a lot of people that prefer that. If you look on social media as well, that's also been a big sort of, obviously it's an area of growth and discovery for us in terms of building audience, and video works so much better there. So even though we've done shows that are audio first or audio only, we have still filmed them so that we can use it to do, to market on social media and other places. Between Spotify and YouTube today, obviously there's a huge opportunity as well for video podcasts to grow. We've heard mixed things again there, right? We have heard from people who listen to podcasts on YouTube, but they play it and then don't look at the screen, right? So there's still places, I think, again, driving is a good example, where audio still has some room, and I think we'll continue to have room. Ramzi and me were having a chat some time back, and there are certain shows that maybe don't even work so easily when you're trying to produce them. Think like a documentary style show where there's so many different interviews and so many things. The video cost of that could be astronomical, right? So there's a lot of other reasons why one format works versus the other one, right? So I think it's very important. I want to preface this when we're talking about data, is when you're looking at your show, because it's easy for us also as companies, because we're looking at a wide scope of things to say, okay, I'm going to let data lead that conversation, but I think it has to come also in terms of, what is the purpose with which you started your show, and are you able to drive that? And so if your audience then is consuming things on video, it's a very natural shift to say, okay, I'm going to add video to it, but maybe that's not necessarily true, right? So I think that's definitely one thing. Post-pandemic, we've seen also categories shifting quite a bit, right? And those categories are very different in the region versus, let's say, in the US and elsewhere. So a simple example is, the true crime sort of category, which is, I think, every second show or third show in the US is a true crime show, right? Whereas if I look at the same thing here, every second show is an entrepreneurial show, right? And so then it becomes about finding out, can you create a niche for yourself in that same space, which is quite crowded. James shared a data point this morning that out of the millions and millions of podcasts, less than 10% of them are actually producing actively. And so I think that's another important thing, right? So actually having consistency within your content, because what lands up happening when we're talking about listeners is listeners form habits around your show. So, I listen to this show on Monday when I go to work, and I listen to this show on Thursday when I go to work. If you drop your show, something else will eventually replace it, so that when you actually come back, there may not actually be room there. So those are some of the things that you absolutely have to see. Category-wise, sorry, I started talking about that, but things like education became quite big post-2020, 2021 as a category, right? So people want to learn from their shows. It's not only about having to listen to, a conversation, but actually are there takeaways or there aren't. Yeah, try not to get too lost in the data sometimes, and I think that can be actually a bit painful as well, right? Where you start finessing for very, very granular data, which can be quite painful. Okay. I think overall, if you look at remember the context of where you were maybe 6 months ago or a year ago, are you growing from there or not? Is your audience growing with you or not? Should be things you should look at.
All right, that's quite insightful. Well, thank you so much for all these advice. I'm sure it was helpful for everyone. And I think on to the next panel. Thank you so much.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you, guys.